Okay, well, thank you so much to Sharon for inviting me to come today, and I feel energized after hearing that amazing musical virtuosity. I always felt that Xenakis was such a multiplicitous person with so many points of view. I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Victoria Meyers. I'm an architect. I'm showing two images here. One of them is my firm's logo, HMA. The image is a horizon line, and there are mathematical divisions on the line, which talks about the way in which I see architecture as a collection of ideas which incorporate ideas from science, from nature, and from geometry and mathematics. And then next to that, I'm showing an image of a project that is almost complete, should be open in about a month, which is Infinity Chapel, located in Lower Manhattan. And I'm also wanted to show you and introduce to you Michael Schumacher, who's going to be speaking not today, but I think tomorrow in this group of lectures and presentations. Michael is a composer, a New York composer, and we've been collaborating for about 10 years now. And next to that, I'm showing the facade of a building that's going up right now at Battery Park City, across from Ground Zero. And this is a new community center, and I've commissioned Michael to work with me. He's writing a piece for the facade of the building. It used to be called Birdsong, but now it's just called Water. We changed what we were working on. But for me, what's always been very important is to have a practice where I incorporate all these ideas, very similar to Xenakis, of form and architecture and space is directly influenced by and related to music and sound and light and mathematics. And I'm showing two images from a thesis I wrote when I was finishing undergraduate school. And surprisingly enough, the thesis was about the relationship between the work of Xenakis and Guarano Guarini. Guarano Guarini was a Theatine monk who was a practicing architect. He did Baroque architecture, and he also was a mathematician. In fact, wrote treatises about mathematics and calculus, made various discoveries about the calculus. And next to that, I'm showing Xenakis' pavilion, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, the Phillips Pavilion. And for me, what was really interesting about getting ready for the symposium and giving this lecture, because when I was first contacted, I thought, what am I going to talk about? I didn't really know what to think. And then I thought, oh, didn't you write a thesis like some time ago? And then I thought, yeah, let's start with that, because you talked about Xenakis. And then as I was putting this whole thing together, I was like, oh my God, my entire life's work has come from this thesis. So I was really quite amazed. And it was very interesting for me. This is more of a detailed view of the cathedral at Turin, which is the most famous cathedral that Guarini ever designed, and just to show you how he created very precise mathematical and geometric relations in his work, and he used light, and a hugely important aspect of his building was the way in which it was a vehicle for sound. And next to that is the music of the spheres, which was a very prominent discussion in science and also in mathematics at that time, and something that he was also extremely involved with. And then for me, what was really interesting when I was doing the thesis was the relationship between these two people. The fact that Xenakis is a person who looked in a very careful way at mathematics, that was very involved with cutting-edge mathematics, looked at a lot of hyperbolic paraboloids, and uses shapes, not just to make music, but also to make architecture. And next to that, I'm showing his Cosmic City, which was a series of conical-shaped buildings which were 3 miles high, pierced through the clouds, and all based on hyperbolic paraboloids. And we're also involved with having inhabitants in a envelope, which also had a relationship to all these other universal cosmic things, very much like Guarano Guarini. So this actually is a little bit strange. Huh. It seems to have dropped one of my images. The image which should be to the left of this image of optics from Xenakis is a piece that I actually wrote with Michael Schumacher called The Light Score. And it's a composition that I developed and which Michael and I presented at the Kitchen in 2004. And he told me I was going to be doing this piece where I was going to write a musical score, and I had thought, I don't really know how to do this. So I thought, really, you should go with what you know. It's the best thing if you're an architect. You should really use shapes and forms. So I used a series of very common shapes, the square, the circle, and the line, which are the most basic geometric forms. And I created a score which started very slowly with those three shapes. And then it started emphatically repeating those shapes one after the other. And then it went into a very chaotic mixture. And then it slowed down and went to just one of the shapes. And then it ended with a line across the floor. And for me, it has a relationship to this other piece from Xenakis, the Polytope de Cluny, where he developed this beautiful shape and used laser light beams to create space and sound and spectacle. This is an image to my far right of two skylights studies for the Infinity Chapel, which we're working on right now. And next to that is an image of windows with patterns on them from La Tourette, which were designed by Xenakis. And for me, what's really interesting is how Xenakis was writing at the time that he was working on La Tourette, his incredibly important piece, Metastasis, yes. And I think that light is an incredibly important part of architecture. In the Infinity Chapel, we basically are working with a space which was shaped as a perfect cube, which we deformed, we're saying, through the act of light. The whole church actually happens on 2 floors. There's a Sunday school below. So we have these punctures going through the floor with these shapes in them which connect the two spaces, one to the other. And then also, for me, there's just a really powerful and an incredibly important aspect of light to architecture. I wrote a book which was published in 2007 called Designing with Light. And it involved a lot of the researches and discussions that I had with physicist at Harvard, Dr. Lenny Howe, who is really at the cutting edge of light research in the world. She's a MacArthur Fellow, and she's discovered a way to put light into a sort of thing called an Einstein condensate, which is matter which has been cooled to almost absolute zero. And she knows how to move light around. So she's really revolutionized the way that light can be used in things like microscopic computers as a result. And again, as I was getting ready to give this talk, and just looking through all the different papers and books and things about Xenakis, I was amazed to find this sketch, which was his drawing of a thing called the mathematical object, which he placed in the Phillips Pavilion. And next to that are the drawings that I made, which diagrammed the Infinity Chapel. I started by thinking, okay, well, we have a space which is a perfect square, and if you push on that shape, well, you can eventually get to an infinity sign. And then if you had a cube, and you begin to push on that, and you add the aspect of time, you have a hypercube. And really, the way I saw this chapel evolving was that it was a cube which was deformed by time and light. So it was basically based on a hypercube deformed by light. And this is the piece I'm working on with Michael, the facade at Battery Park City. And below that is the facade study that Xenakis did for the Fermini Youth Center in 1956, 1959, which was pretty close to when he was also working on La Tourette. He had just finished La Tourette before he did that. And I just think it's really interesting how, again, it's like many years later, I discovered there are many parallels in my work and the work of this person who influenced me at a a very formative time in my thinking. This is a close-up of the glass panes in a public room at La Tourette, and next to that is a full-scale close-up of the frit pattern we're going to be etching on the glass at Battery Park City. To my far right, I'm showing another piece that I did with another New York sound artist, Jane Philbrick, who I've also collaborated with. And this is at Socrates Sculpture Park. There are a series of sound booths that we developed. The sound booths were meant to be one in each borough in the city of New York. And we would be inviting all the people from Queens to come and speak in the sound booth and overlay all of these different languages, because Queens, the borough of Queens has more different languages spoken than any other place in the world, something like more than 1,200 different languages. So we thought we would create this complex sound space by just overlaying all these voices. And if you stood in it, in Queens you would have a mic, but in the other spaces you would just hear things. And then next to that, showing another piece that I found, which is the City of Music, designed by Xenakis in 1984 as part of a competition. Again, creating this sort of vehicle for music and sound in a very mathematically precise way. And it's weird, again, it dropped out one of my images, but it was just a sort of blow up of the sound piece that I did with Jane Philbrick. And this is another piece that I find very interesting by Xenakis, which is his Hibiki Hanama. Another one of the sound and light pieces that he did for the Osaka World's Fair in 1970. For me, what's really interesting is the way that he placed all these speakers in the room so that sound would come from every which direction, and you wouldn't really be able to have any focal point of sound. And always, you know, his mind is always thinking about how do you sound, light, space in a very complex way, so that you begin to have an awareness of your place within the universe and the way in which the universe is perhaps put together in a very mathematical way. And that's how we as human beings really measure this form. This is another image to my far right from the Infinity Chapel. And I'm showing the Polytope de Cluny, which was a piece that Xenakis installed in 1972 and 1973. These are the old Roman baths in Paris. For me, this is very interesting. I'm sort of showing, on the one hand, how at the Infinity Chapel, this is the deformed end of the chapel, where there's a pane behind there with many lights behind it, so that we can use all these punctures we put at the end of the chapel to transmit light in different ways. And next to that is an installation where there are many lasers that come on, and there are something like 400 different mirrors adjusted to reflect the laser lights to create this incredibly interesting idea about tonation in the space. I'm showing here to the far right my performance of my light score with Michael Schumacher at the kitchen, and next to that the performance of the Polytope de Cluny. And finally, just end with this slide of the Infinity Chapel in construction, the end elevation, and next to that, the Polytope de Montreal from 1967 by Xenakis. And again, just sort of say that I feel very grateful that I was invited today. It gave me a chance to visit some old friends and to just remember where I started on this journey of becoming an architect. Okay, thank you.